The following is a look at the killers of Dead by Daylight, and any real-world equivalents they might have. Let's continue. Frank Morrison and accomplices, aka the Legion. Frank Morrison, Julie Kostenko, Susie Lavoie, and Joey, we don't know his last name, are a group of troubled and unruly teenagers that caused havoc in their native Canada during the 1990s. This dreadful foursome revolved around their leader, as is often the case with killers who have accomplices. Frank Morrison was a juvenile delinquent with a history of truancy, bullying, and petty crime. Morrison was in and out of foster care throughout his entire youth, and as such didn't have a happy childhood. His final foster father was a neglectful alcoholic, and that's all we really know about that. Frank soon met his girlfriend Julie, her best friend Susie, and Joey at various parties to which Frank brought drink and drugs. They were all younger than him and easy to impress and coerce, and Frank is implied to have that psychopathic charisma that keeps cropping up in real-life cases. The tome even demonstrates a certain degree of wisdom and insight. But speaking of real-life cases, Julie seemed to have a fascination with true crime and murders, and even catalogued serial killers. Psh, loser. The tome implies Julie was almost as bad as Frank, entwining the two in a sort of folie à deux. It's even suggested she wanted to kill multiple people. Susie and Joey are a little more redeemable, but interpretations vary. This little band would gradually escalate in petty crime and theft. There was also an incident where they burned down an old theatre. However, they truly crossed the line at one botched vandalism/robbery at Joey's old hardware store from which he was fired. Inability to hold down a job is also linked with secondary psychopathy. In a moment of frenzy, Frank stabbed a cleaner who was still working at the store, and then Frank forced the remaining three to stab him as well, which they did with utmost reluctance. While in the process of disposing of the body at their lair, the Ormond Resort, that familiar fog enveloped them. I have no problem speculating that Frank Morrison suffered from antisocial personality disorder. He was impulsive, angry, a delinquent, contumacious, irresponsible, remorseless, and with no regard for the safety or well-being of anyone around him. He likely cared for Julie, but I'm half tempted to describe that as a morality pet, similar to some real-world examples of utterly evil people still having loved ones. Peter Curtin to his wife, or maybe Clifford Olson to his wife. But as we've seen, Julie was far from innocent herself, and the tome showed us a very arrogant and grandiose attention-seeker. Perhaps Rose to Fred West would be a better comparison. But what of it? Maybe the same can be said of Susie and Joey. The reason is because they were just teenagers, and all teenagers are narcissistic. It's something you're supposed to grow out of, and so far those three haven't grown up yet. And I respectfully disagree with the theories that the other three members of the Legion are as bad as Frank. Frank is a cut below even these hoodlums. Parallels can actually be drawn between Frank and the Clown, who I also felt fit the criterion for ASPD. Both even explicitly mention drugs and alcohol, substances being popular choices for self-medication amongst certain kinds of mental illnesses. There's a type of callousness to both of their behaviours, a flavour of cruelty. I also want to drop the famous line, "prone to boredom." It never meant much to me, but I think it's worth remembering that that is another sign of psychopathy. Apparently. Some of the criteria are rather vague for a layman like me. Now, it was clear to me that following something as off-the-wall as Shattered Bloodline, Behaviour wanted something a bit more grounded and realistic. There's nothing mystical or otherworldly about this gang. They're a bunch of punks, and we've likely encountered undesirables like them in our communities. But what's more relevant is how many real-life cases reflect this sort of les enfants terribles type of crime. Over the years, I've been suspicious of a few cases that could be the inspiration behind the Legion. The murder of Skylar Neese is one such case. 2 girls murdered their friend via stabbing, but that was all female and it didn't connect to broader criminal activity, at least not really. Truthfully, the story of the Legion reminds me a little bit of Charles Manson and his followers. There may have been over 100 members of the family though, but the most notorious are mostly female and some males. And it's ultimately a story about teens stabbing people. But this still feels a bit too convenient. Other infamous killing sprees and murders that were undertaken by groups include the Wichita Massacre, the murder of Junko Furuta, the Hi-Fi murders, the Knoxville murders, and the murder of Joanna Doherty. But some of these acts were carried out by slightly older perpetrators, or duos, and the cases often contain elements that are best left undiscussed. I believe the closest is the case of the downtown posse responsible for the Christmas killings. I have another confession to make. I didn't know about this particular case until a better Dead by Daylight YouTuber brought it to my attention. Mint Skull is a better editor, writer, better at the game than me, and likely more handsome than me, so go watch his stuff instead as I retread what a better content creator has laid out. Hopefully I can at least add something. The Downtown Posse was a quartet consisting of 4 teenagers, 2 males and 2 females that went on a killing spree in the early 90s. The similarities are already quite compelling, but this real-life case actually resulted in 6 people murdered. Why tone down the fictional example? One possibility is that reality is unrealistic and the writers wanted to bring the lore for these characters down to earth, make it feel ripped from the headlines, not ripped from the worst of true crime. I don't know if I agree with this. After all, there are plenty of DBD killers with outlandish kill counts and details, but perhaps this speaks to the writer's commitment to diversity amongst the characters. The more interesting theory is that Legion was just getting started. It's possible that Frank had successfully corrupted the other 3, and they were going to continue their crime spree until forcibly stopped by the authorities. I mentioned Escalation earlier, and I had forgotten at the time that their tome is subtitled Escalation. Maybe this is why the entity took them in the first place, knowing their potential, so who knows? But a more interesting 2 males and 2 females are the launch survivors for Dead by Daylight. Laid out comparatively, the Legion are their evil counterparts. Sort of. There are a lot of extra details here and there, with cosmetics implying more murders and add-ons implying they were banned. Them being musicians wasn't in the backstory or the tome, and I think this is more examples of alternative universes and the slight differences between them. Claudette doesn't just own a thong, after all. I suppose it all depends on what you want for your headcanon. And my headcanon says that the cosmic immortal eldritch abomination known as the Entity really did make a mixtape to join a teenage metal band. My first impression was always that this is DBD's take on the Scream franchise, where multiple killers don a white mask and run around stabbing people in the 90s. At the time, it seemed like Behaviour would never get the license for this IP, so as Hillbilly to Leatherface, we'd have a Legion as a homage to this legendary horror franchise. That is, until they pulled it off. Closing notes make me link the Legion pins to the pins the Zodiac Killer wanted others to wear. Given Julie was a true crime buff, I don't think that's unreasonable, but maybe I'm overreaching, I really don't know. The Legion's special power is running around with a knife stabbing people. Yeah, this is one of the easy ones for sure, but the Legion were never very good. At any time, the best counter is to split up as much as possible and even lead the sucker to a corner, but not a dead zone, don't be stupid. Kind of like those old horror movies, actually.
This is like the beginning of every horror movie I've ever seen.
I think we should all split up.
Clever. Earlier iterations of Feral Frenzy were downright atrocious. Does anyone else remember the original Frank's mixtape? Or the Moonwalk exploit? Geez, after a few reworks over the years, the Legion are now acceptable, I suppose. I never liked them. Legion always make me think of Raiden from the Metal Gear Solid franchise, a character disliked by the fanbase that keeps trying to make a comeback and trying to be cool. But it just falls flat for me, and funnily enough, both cases show whiny teens that want to be edgy. I'll admit MGS2 was way ahead of its time, but the Legion will need more than that to finally get my respect, and I'm sure plenty of others feel the same way. So, with them being in a bad spot for years, Behaviour wound up getting experimental with them. The idea to change the terror radius based on what add-ons they have equipped really was an inspired move. Once again, the music department comes to the rescue. I'd argue that the chase music is now too good for the purposes of the game, but we can indulge ourselves just this once. I'm still a headbanger at my heart. And although the BFF necklace add-on isn't very good, it does represent a good idea in making add-ons more dynamic. Maybe Behaviour will revisit this idea.
This is too much.
I'll admit it. I do find the edgy gang fun sometimes. It does feel great to get that fifth stab and get her down, and maybe I'm just prejudiced and jaded from my previous experience with them. On both sides. Screw it, I like the Legion. It's just difficult to get over those intense first impressions. Oh well. At least there's never been a killer more disliked than them.